think this is actually the smallest stage I've ever been on. May fall off. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Waterstones here in gorgeous London in Piccadilly. Are you all well? Yes. Thank you. And the incredible John Boyne. And your new novel for young adults, My Brother's Name is Jessica. So where did the inspiration come from to write this book?
Well, good evening, firstly. Thank you all for coming along tonight. I wrote a first draft of this book about 4 years ago, I would say, when I was in Australia, and sort of between novels, and I was in Australia for about 2 months, and I just wrote a draft of it. It was a subject that really interested me. It was obviously very much in the culture, in the news. People were talking about it. And often I find if I just get overpowered by an idea, I just want to sit down and write it. So I wrote a first draft in quite a short space of time over those few weeks. And I left it on my computer because I wanted to publish a few adult novels in a row, which I did. But I knew it was there, and I knew I was going to come back to it at the right moment. And so when I came back to it, it felt like the right moment because it was such an important topic, such a topic that people were talking about. But I felt very much that young people and children, I wasn't sure how many books there were out there for them on the subject that would both, firstly, as a novel, entertain them. You want to have a good story, but also educate them and make them understand the two different types of children in a way. One, the child who has a friend who is going through the experience that Jessica is, who is transgender, and the child who is confused about that and wanting to be a friend, but not knowing how to be. And then the child who is themselves transgender and is confused about that and how to do that. And is there a supportive world out there? Are there allies? Are there friends? Or am I just going to be a figure of fun in some way?
Yeah, I guess if anyone's going through something which is kind of life-changing, that's the thing that you worry about the most, isn't it? Are you going to be a figure of ridicule? Is someone going to make fun of you or something like that? What are people going to say? And that always worries you, I guess, doesn't it? In any change in life.
That and the fact that there are some things in life that once said can never be taken back.
Yeah.
I remember when I came out as gay, I knew that the minute I told one person, that was it. It was done, and you couldn't turn around a few weeks later and say, "No, I was wrong. I got that." I was just having a moment.
Having a bad day. It was one of those days.
It was just Jason Donovan. I couldn't.
Rick Astley we were talking about on the way in. We were talking about vinyl.
We were talking about Rick Astley, but not in a sexual way.
No, we weren't actually. No, we must point that out. We were talking about first records and stuff.
But so the minute I think there is that, there are obviously a billion differences between gay people and transgender people, but one thing that I think is in common there is that the moment, it takes an awful lot of courage to get to that point where you feel ready to confide in somebody and seek support. But the minute you say it on either thing, it's not just about the seeking of the support. It's about saying it out loud and hearing yourself say it out loud and saying, I'm no longer going to just block this inside myself. I'm going to say it out loud and damn the consequences.
It's almost like you've pressed the button, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there's no going back at that point because then it becomes gossip, doesn't it? And then people, especially, I guess, with the trans subject, they immediately go, are you gay? Because that's the question that you get asked.
Well, I think most people in 2019 are very familiar with, everybody's probably got a gay friend or a gay family member. It's not that big a deal. Nobody really cares anymore. The trans subject is less there's less education on it. We don't know as much about it. And your initial question asking why did I want to write this? It was coming from that place. I was saying that even I writing it don't know that much. My narrator asking the question, when I was writing it and researching it, I came from a place of not knowing too much, and I had to learn as I wrote it and put myself in the voice of a little boy who, the younger brother of the trans character, who himself doesn't know that much and is asking stupid questions, making insensitive comments, and having to be pulled up on them. We don't know enough, and I think by anybody publishing books on the subject, whether they're fiction, whether they're non-fiction, whatever it is giving the opportunity to then bring that into the mainstream in the way that gay culture really was brought into the mainstream.
Did you find it particularly eye-opening in your research about what trans people go through on their journey, whether it's trans children or trans adults who are transitioning later on in life?
Yeah, I mean, I found out so many things that I didn't know. I would say the number one thing that really surprised me, and I use it in the book at one point, is, and when I talked to trans friends, I talked to trans organizations and so on when I was writing this, and the parents of trans people. But the one thing that I just didn't get when I started it was the fact that so many people, when you are thinking about a trans person, particularly a trans person who is, a male to female trans person, you think about genitalia. Yeah. It's your first thought. You think about surgery, And I remember, like, I have a friend who's trans, and I remember saying to her mother, so what's quite early on in the conversation? So what's the next step? Is she going to go through like surgery and everything? And her mother answered me, but I could see she looked a little uncomfortable. And I said to her, is that the wrong thing to ask? And she said, yeah, it is. It is the wrong thing to ask. And then when I spoke to my friend, she said that it's what everybody focuses on. And actually, it's about what's going on in your mind and in your body and in your shape and in how you present yourself to the world. It's not about that. And I take a moment in the book where Jessica basically explodes at Sam, the narrator, and says, enough talking about penises. That is not the defining thing here. There is so much more going on here. And I must admit for myself, I felt, it was kind of my first thought when, because you come from a place of relative ignorance and you learn as you go.
Well, I guess it's how, when you're born, it's how we're identified, isn't it? You know, what you see between the legs, that's the gender of the child. Yeah. And I guess that's what we focus on, is that's what's happened in society for all of time, isn't it? But it's not necessarily what's between your legs, it's what's between your ears. Yeah. It's your brain gender,
but
it's how you feel.
It takes a little bit of time, I think, for people to get that. And I think the only way to get it is by, or one way to get it, is by knowing somebody and having somebody like the mother of my friend tell me why that was the wrong question to ask, or my friend also telling me things, But look, how else do we learn other than by asking those questions?
Let's talk about the protagonist, Sam, because it's through the eyes of Sam, isn't it? And this is a big change for him as well, because he idolises his sibling, doesn't he?
Oh, yeah, and I felt that was important from the start. Firstly, I needed to write it from the point of view of Sam. I couldn't write it from the point of view of Jessica. I thought that would be kind of a step too far for me to do that, to put myself in those shoes. I thought that would prove very offensive to people. I thought I should put myself in the shoes of Sam, who goes and asks those questions. And I thought about it the same way. I generally don't like using these words too much, but I thought about it the same way I thought about Boyne the striped pajamas. That Bruno walks to a fence every day, looks across and asks what's going on there, and doesn't know anything, is naive and innocent. And it's the same thing, that Sam is, kind of metaphorically speaking, walking to a fence every day, asking questions, doesn't know what's going on, and is asking questions, and is baffled, is embarrassed, is bullied in school because of it. He doesn't want his sibling to change. He likes the status quo. He's always, in the original chapter, the first chapter, when we're presented with Jason as the original identity, it's clear that he's like this most popular boy in school, great footballer, an all-around sort of like stereotypical top guy, like just the best boy in school. And
everyone can think of that name of that person who was a cool kid in school.
Exactly. I mean, I can remember being that person. And so, from Sam's point of view, I don't know why everybody's laughing. But from, Sam doesn't want that to change. He's also, Jessica has always been a brilliant older brother when he was the brother. He's always been a brilliant older sibling. From the minute that, the opening chapter, we hear about things that happened when Sam was born, and, just how great this sibling has always been. And he's a kid. He doesn't want those things to change. He thinks, well, if you change your name, if you change your body, if you change your identity, is that going to, like, what about your personality? You know, is that going to change? Are you no longer going to be this one person in life who I can rely on, who I can trust? And the story really, in a nutshell, is about Jessica effectively saying to him, don't be ridiculous. Of course I'm not. You know, if you wanted to sum it up in a sentence, it's kind of that.
That's how, because I changed my gender, 5-6 years ago, something like that. And that's the one thing I found is all of my friends they didn't know what I was going to be like. They thought my whole personality was going to change, everything was going to change. And they did feel it was a little bit of a minefield for them. And they went through a mourning process because they thought they'd lost that person. And then they all of a sudden realized one day that, no, you're still the same person. You're just happy. You've not got that noise inside your head, and I think
I think there's also the concern, because if you are a family member or a friend, if you love somebody, and you're aware that, like, this is not this world is a cruel place, and it can be very difficult for trans people. A lot of trans people will suffer abuse on the street, or looks, or somebody shouting something at them. There's always a potential for violence in a way that there isn't quite the same otherwise. And anybody, I mean, it's the same as being. I can remember telling my parents I was gay, and one of the first things they were worried about was, like, they loved me, and it was like they worry what the future will hold. And I don't think it's kind of bigotry or anything for anybody to feel that. It's not unusual to wish that the person, your child or something, will be uncomplicated in a way, because you don't want you don't want somebody to go through difficult times. You want them to be happy for all the way through and without any complications along the way.
And Jessica says that towards the back end of the book, because she assumes that before the hormones have started and everything, she says she looks quite masculine, and she's got a strong jawline or something, and she imagines that she's going to get abuse, but it doesn't turn out that way, does it?
No, it doesn't, because actually the most positive character in the book is Jessica herself. The parents are nightmares. The brother is an idiot. And Jessica is the one who knows what she is doing from the start. From the minute at the end of the first chapter, when she comes down the stairs, she knows what she is doing. She is sure about her identity. She's apprehensive and anxious about what it's going to mean and what she's going to have to go through in life. At least in the initial years while she forms that identity, but she's up for it. She's brave. She doesn't care what anybody says. She's like, nope, I know what I'm doing. You
make that decision in life, don't you? Whatever. If anyone in here has made a decision in that, we've all made decisions in our lives, haven't we? And you do get to a point where, right, that's it. From this day forth, this is changing, and I'm going to do this. And you get to a point where there's no going back.
Yeah, and I think, one thing I tried to do was in all the chapters after chapter 1, in the first chapter, that character is a bit gloomy at times. But from then on, she's pretty cheerful. It's everybody else who is like, losing their minds and stuff. But she's actually sort of like, I'm fine, really.
Well, let's talk about the parents, because her mother is Secretary of State.
Yes.
And she doesn't want any of this to ruin her chances of being Prime Minister.
Yeah, it's, when I wrote the first draft of this, it was, as I say, it was a few years ago, and I created this scene or this idea for this character where she was a cabinet minister and had her eye on the top job, but so did many other people, because Britain was going through some sort of traumatic event. And
don't say the B word.
And it turned out, and so I kept that going through it. And I do tend there's humor in this book. I hope there is anyway. A book like this needs to have as much humor as possible. And I have often made, in my children's books, I have often made the parents kind of monstrous in a sort of Roald Dahl, over the top, just terrible way. I either kill the parents in the first chapter, or I make them absent. Even in their presence, I make them sort of just not aware of their children at all. And in this case, yes, the mother is looking to become Prime Minister, the father is her secretary, and they're just focused completely on that. And they're abandoning both of their children at their time of need. And not just at their time of need, I mean, they're just not there for them at all. But it gives me an opportunity to, in some ways, to have some fun with them as well, to have a few jokes running through the thing.
Well, political figures in this day and age that we live in can be, ridiculed, and they are daily.
Yes.
And so that gives you lots of layers to play with, doesn't it, I guess, with the characters?
Yeah, it does. And, like, it's not a political book as such, but the rest of that family has, like, it's not just about the narrator. The parents have to also go on this, I always hate the word journey, it sounds like the X Factor, but it's this journey where they realize that actually the most important thing in their lives is their children. And, if you can't do that job right, well, then no other job actually really matters. And they have to realize that themselves.
Do you think the LGBT kind of community has changed a lot since you first came out many years ago?
Well, when I was in university in Dublin, it was still, homosexuality was still a crime. It wasn't decriminalised in Ireland until 1993. And yet, within 22 years, we became the first country in the world to have equal rights marriage by public vote, not just by the government, by actual vote. So, that's something in itself. So it has changed in that way, definitely. When I was in my teens and my early 20s, yeah, I came out in my early 20s, but I was still very nervous about it in some ways, and I still felt bad about it, if you know what I mean. It didn't make me comfortable in the way that it does now. Whereas with my nephews and nieces and their friends, they're all in sort of like 20, 21 age group. They all seem to be like, doing it with anybody that they can find. They don't, and it's
no one cares. The
nobody
next
cares.
generation
But
Z doesn't.
They don't care, and also it's like for anybody in that generation to make, say, a homophobic comment, which would have happened, when we were kids and stuff, it would be like making a racist comment or something. You would be expelled from the group within seconds. It would be beyond the beyonds, And I also think that young people of that age, if anything, they value and respect people who are interested in gender and sexuality and experimentation. They think that's actually a pretty cool way to live.
And they're more open these days, aren't they? I guess when we were growing up, we're pretty much of the same vintage in the fact that we would...
32.
32, yeah. 24 I was going for. But you didn't really talk about your feelings that much, did you, when we were growing up? You just didn't. You kind of buried them under the carpet, or you confide in a couple of close friends, and then that was that. And I guess that's, our parents didn't at all. Things just weren't talked about. Things were brushed well under the carpet. Whereas this next generation coming through, even though I'm glad I'm not 17, 18 years old now with social media and everything and the whole pressures that brings with it, but it must be massively liberating to just be allowed to be who you want to be these days, and it's just going to get better, isn't it?
Well, I mean, you ask them, how are you, what's going on, and they actually tell you.
Yeah.
And it takes like 30 minutes, and you go, it was a rhetorical question. I'm actually not that interested. But yeah, no, it's fantastic because it means that there's no shame, there's no, and to get serious for a moment, I bet I certainly knew people, perhaps you did, who took their own lives. For that very reason, we had a huge problem in Ireland with that, with young men particularly taking their lives at a young age, usually because of being gay. And I worked in Waterstones with a couple of people who did that when I was very young, and you look back now and you go, for God's sakes, you were 22, and if you'd held on, things were like the country was going to change. How can a society make you feel so bad that it gets to that extreme? And then to bring it back to the transgender subject, I dare say, I don't know anybody who has, perhaps you do, but I'm sure, that in time that will change too, where, and everything that happens, every person who is willing to talk about their story and share that story and say, actually, you said earlier, I don't know if it was here when we were out there, but like, that's when you became happy. And that's, that's the key point.
It's finding happiness, whether it is.
Whereas people will think, you're going to be really unhappy. You're going to be miserable. But actually, you can never be miserable by being completely honest and upfront with people. You just can't. It's impossible. You can only be miserable by lying about things.
The day I said the words, in fact, I said it on the radio, of all places, and my whole world became in colour. I could actually see. Colours became more vivid. There wasn't that fog.
Yeah.
I felt like I was lying my entire life. And because I've adored radio since I was a child, and I threw myself into radio probably far too much, because that was the sticking plaster. That was the thing that I put over all of my anxiety and issues, because that made it go away temporarily. But when I found myself in the radio studio on the air, having been on the air for many years, and the thoughts creeping in, that's when I realized that this is not going to go away. And that's when, talking about people taking their lives, for the fear of being ostracized, I nearly took my life. I planned it. And several times. And there's a whole backstory which involves a car and everything, and a car being restored. But this car is central to me still being here, in the fact that it wasn't ready and I couldn't gas myself in it because it didn't have a catalytic converter. So all these things, it is absolutely ridiculous. It's a Vauxhall Nova. It's ridiculous, but that is the thing, and I was planning that.
Yeah.
Because I was so scared of how society was going to treat me, how I was going to be viewed, everything. And I couldn't bear that. I couldn't bear losing everything. So it does come back to what we were talking about, and the fact that people did and still do take their lives. And it's heartbreaking. No one should ever take their lives.
But that's why, like, with young people and in schools and so on, I hope with this book and with books like it by other writers, if it can be, for want of a better word, normalized, where the taboo comes out of it, and where children in school can actually have a conversation about it and say, who cares? What's the big deal? Then, I mean, it's a utopian way of thinking about the world, but we're better trying to be utopians. We may as well aim for that.
Well, exactly.
Even if we're going to fail, we may as well aim for it, right?
I always say, so what, I changed my gender? It's not a big deal. Does it really matter? When you're in the shower in the morning, do you think, oh, those pesky trans people? Or when you're walking around, the supermarket, doing your big shop, getting on your nerves. You just don't, do you? You get on with your life, and that's, I guess, where we need to be just in life, isn't it? Just happy for everyone, for all our fellow human beings. You are going to read some of the book for us this evening, aren't you, as well?
Yeah, just a short piece from a point about, I think it's about 4 chapters in, where the family have gone away on a holiday to the Lake District, and Sam and Jessica are sharing a room, and the family really haven't discussed this topic at all since the big revelation. And it's, a month or two later, and it's the big elephant in the room as such. My brother Jason and I were sharing a bedroom, and that night, when we went upstairs, there was a real awkwardness between us, something I'd felt deeply on the night we arrived, and that had only grown in the intervening days. Before he made his big announcement, I would have loved to share a bedroom with him again, something we hadn't done since I was a little kid, but now I only felt anxious and uncomfortable. And even though he changed into his pajamas obliviously while flicking through the channels on the television, I took mine into the bathroom and undressed in there, not even looking in his direction when I came out. As I climbed into bed, however, I noticed he'd finally released his hair from the ponytail, leaving it falling around his shoulders, and that the scarf that had caused so much trouble over dinner was hanging over the back of a chair, while his blue scrunchie was sitting on the dressing table. I wondered what he'd think if he woke up and they were missing. He'd know that I had taken them, of course, but if only one was missing, then he might think he'd just misplaced it. Which was worse, the scarf or the scrunchie? The scarf, I decided, definitely the scarf. Sam, what's going on? I wondered whether to ask this or not, but decided that if I didn't do it now, I never would. About school, I said. Yes? And all the rumors. Yes, what about them? It must be upsetting you. He sighed and waited a few moments before answering. I'm trying to ignore all the noise, he said. Most of my friends have been pretty good about it, actually. Some don't know what to say, but no one has tried to bully me or anything. I laughed bitterly. Of course they haven't, I said. What's that supposed to mean? Well, you're you, aren't you, I asked. If I come into school with a new spot, the whole class jumps on me. You can say that you're transgender. Yes, that. And say it, Sam. The word isn't going to burn your mouth. You can tell people that, I continued, and no one bullies you because you've always been popular. It's so easy for people like you. Now it was his turn to laugh. You think it's easy, he asked. They may not be saying mean things to my face, but do you think I don't know what they're saying behind my back? Even my closest friends are nervous of saying the wrong thing. You know, there's been a few parties lately I haven't been invited to. A few months back, I'd have been at the top of the guest list, and now I only hear about them on Monday morning. Believe me, Sam, I may be getting a different type of response to you, but it's not any easier. I said nothing, trying to think this through. I still thought it would be easier if no one was making fun of you to your face. Do you want to rate the minibar? He asked. And I looked at him. The minibar, he repeated, jumping out of bed and opening the fridge. It was full of small bottles and cans. What do you want? He asked. It's Coke, Fanta, Sprite. Won't we get in trouble? I asked. Oh, who cares if we do? If they didn't want us to take something from it, they should have put a lock on it. Here, he said, throwing me a Fanta. And I opened it, holding it over the space between our two beds as it fizzed up. He took a can of beer and climbed back into bed with it, sipping the froth from the top and licking his lips. He wasn't supposed to be drinking beer as he was only 17, but I knew he liked it. Sometimes when he came home from a night out with his friends, he was all giggly, and Mum complained that he smelled like a brewery, and the next day he'd lie in bed for hours and roar at me if I came anywhere near him. Okay, Sam, he said, it's 10 years from now. You're 23 years old. Where are you? I thought about it. I have my own place, I said. Good. And what else? It's a really big place, like a mansion. Of course, because I'm really rich. Well, naturally. But what are you doing? Driving my sports car down the motorway with the top down and my music blasting. Ed Sheeran? Shut up. And how have you made all this money? I thought about it. I won the lottery, I said. Lucky. Have you given any to me? Yeah, a little, not too much. I don't want to spoil you. All right, he said. Now back to real life. Seriously, where do you see yourself 10 years from now? I don't know, I said. Am I supposed to know? No, he said. There's no reason you should know anything yet. Did you know what you wanted to be when you were my age, I asked. I knew some things, he said. I bit my lip. I could see where this was leading and wasn't sure I wanted to talk about it. All right then, I said, what about you? 10 years from now, you're 27. Where are you? Ah, he said, grinning and taking a long drink from his beer. Okay, well, first off, I'm a famous superstar writer. Brilliant. And every book I write sells 1 million copies and wins loads of awards. Goes without saying. And I have a beautiful girlfriend who loves me, and I love her too. But she's a crazy nymphomaniac, so insists on having sex with me 10 times a day. I giggled, but then wasn't sure why I was laughing. What? He asked. Nothing, I said. It's not nothing. It's something, so tell me. Well, it's just... Are you sure you don't want a boyfriend? I asked. Why would I want a boyfriend? I don't know, I said. You get that I'm not gay, right? He asked. I mean, it would be fine if I was, and I'd just come out and tell you, but I'm not. Maybe you just don't know that you're gay. But if you think you're really a girl, then shouldn't that mean that you want to be with boys? Not necessarily, he said. It's very complicated. Then tell me, I said, because I don't understand what's going on. Explain it to me. He sat back and sighed before taking another drink from his beer, finishing it, and getting another. Do you know what one of my first memories is? He asked. I was 3 years old, and I just started at that play school we used to go to when we were little. Do you remember it? Yes, I said. I'd spent a year there too before starting real school. It was my first day, he said, and I was playing with a girl called Amelia and a boy called Jack. And Amelia said she needed a wee. So then Jack said he needed a wee. So naturally I said I needed a wee too. So all three of us got up to go to the toilets. And there were two, of course, one for the boys and one for the girls, but they were next door to each other. And when we reached them, Jack went one way and Amelia went the other, but I followed her. She screamed, even though we'd barely got inside the door, and pushed me out, and the teacher came over and told me I'd gone to the wrong door, that the boys' was over there, and I shook my head and refused to go in. No matter what she did, I said I wouldn't use it, that I was supposed to use the girls' toilet. And you know, I was only 3 years old. I didn't know anything about anything, but it just felt right to me in some way. In the end, because she wouldn't let me in there, I wet myself, and all the other kids were laughing and pointing at me. I didn't care so much about that. There was barely an hour went by when someone in that room wasn't wetting themselves, for one reason or another. By the end of most days, it was like we'd all gone down on the Titanic. Anyway, Mum and Dad were called in the next morning, and they told me off, and from then on, every time I had to go, I had to use the boys' room. But from that day to this, it's just never felt right. You always use the disabled toilet, I said quietly, remembering something I'd noticed for a few years but never really thought much about. I thought maybe he was just self-conscious. I do, yeah. He said, I can't go into the girls, obviously. But somehow I just don't feel right going into the boys. So that's it? I asked, thinking that didn't seem like much of a reason. That's why you think you're a girl? No, of course not. It's just the first thing I remember. But my entire life has been built around moments like that. Asking for a doll for Christmas and being told no, I had to have a gun or a computer game. Being taken shopping for new clothes and just feeling that I was in the wrong part of the store, that a magnet was pulling me up to the next floor. You probably won't remember this, but when I was about 12, I had a birthday party, and for the first time, I didn't want to invite any boys to it, just the girls. I was at that stage when I hated boys, and Dad kept calling me Casanova, but he had it all wrong. Everybody's bodies was changing, and I felt like I belonged with the girls, not the boys. I was just different. I wanted to be with girls and look at girls. So, do you mean you are gay? I asked. No, I already told you. No, I mean, I think if you think you're really a girl, but you like girls, doesn't that mean you are gay after all, like a gay girl? Well, I suppose, he said, thinking about this. I don't know. That's where it gets really complicated. Look, I have to figure it out. I don't know all the answers. I'm only 17. I'm still trying to understand this myself. And what about football? I asked. Oh, I just happen to like football, he said. And I'm good at it. Lots of girls are, you know. The thing is, I said, I hated it when you said you weren't my brother. Maybe I phrased it wrong, he said. One thing I know for sure, though, is that you're my brother, and that you always will be. But you're a boy, I insisted. If you tell me one more time that I have a willy, I'm going to start thinking you're the one who's gay. All right, he said with a sigh. Tell me what you're most frightened of. I swallowed. What if it happens to me? I asked. What if I wake up one day and think I'm a girl? My brother Jason laughed and shook his head. Trust me, you won't. How do you know? I just know. Because I don't want to be a girl, I insisted. I hate girls. You don't hate girls. I hate them. I don't want to be one. They dress stupid. They wear perfume. They're always dancing and rolling their eyes at everyone and being mean and talking about Justin Bieber. And, oh, for God's sake, Sam, he said, there's a lot more to girls than that. Stop being such a dick. What? Honestly, Sam, you don't have anything to worry about. If there's one thing I know for sure, it's that you and I are not alike on this. You're a boy and you always will be. I'm tired. I said, I just want to go to sleep. Can we go to sleep? I don't want to talk about this anymore. You don't hate me, though, do you? Of course I don't hate you, I said. I just want you to get better, that's all. To get better? He sat up in bed and stared at me. Did you just say you want me to get better? Yes, what's wrong with that? So you think I'm sick? Is that it, that I've got an illness? I said nothing for a moment. I knew what I was supposed to say. I knew what he wanted to hear, but I didn't care. Well, that's what Mum and Dad say, I told him. Knowing as I said this, I was being unfair, passing the blame onto them. All right, he said, fine. I'm sorry you feel that way. Will you turn the light off, I asked, lying down and turning my back on him. Not just yet, he said. Close your eyes if you're tired. You'll be asleep soon enough. And I did what he said. I closed my eyes. And after a few minutes, I changed the sound of my breathing to make it seem that I was asleep. But the problem with pretending to be asleep is that you can't look up when you hear somebody opening another beer and another after that, and then falling down into the bed to the sound of their tears. And you have to wait until they're finally asleep before you can get up and turn all the lights off. And you don't get a chance to say sorry.
It is an incredible book, and especially the toilets thing really connected with me, because we were talking upstairs earlier. I had a very similar situation when I was around 3. They put the girls and the boys in different groups, and I kept getting up and sitting with the girls, and it happened several times because that was my natural state of comfortableness. I wasn't programmed. Yeah. It was just where I felt I should be.
And I took that story directly from my friend who told me that at 3 years old, this had happened. And at 3, you know, like I was saying to you earlier, I think my first memory is like about 4. Like, it's not like at 3 you know anything about, like you're, you know, so it's just there in the brain. And you know, I wrote that directly from what she had told me.
It's just the brain forms opposite to what you
Except
come out
I made up
like.
the joke about the Titanic. So.
Thank you so much to everyone for coming along this evening. A big
Thank you.
hand
Appreciate
for the
it.
incredible John Boyne.
Thank you.